So you've probably heard about Canada's alleged labour shortage, but if you're like me, you might be a tad skeptical, seeing as, well, who does labour? People. Do we have more people? Yes. Are we growing at almost twice the rate of every other country in the G7? Also yes. Geopolitical burn. Before we dig into the meat, though, let's start with the potatoes. What is labour? And further, what is a labour shortage? Labour is referring to people between the ages of 15 to 64 who are currently employed or unemployed but looking for work. There's a couple of caveats there, but they're not really pertinent to the point I'm making, so we're moving it on. Regarding the alleged labour shortage, note the difference between a labour shortage and what they're calling a skills shortage. Now, I don't want to get into the whole chicken or goose versus the egg thing here, but you can't really say there's a shortage of something you're unwilling to pay for in the first place. Here you can see Canada's working age population is 65.7%, which is down 3% from about 20 years ago, while the 65 plus group grew by about 6%. And if you're curious, yes, it is baby boomers, the generational speed bump we all have to slow down for.
What in the hey now?
Just kidding.
Oh,
kind of.
how could you?
So, with definitions and demographics out of the way, we arrive at the meat section of the video.
All right, you're not gonna put that skin in your mouth, are you? You did.
Currently, we're at 61.9% employment with a 65.3% participation rate, which are both roughly back to their pre-pandemic levels. Using the magic of this shitty chart I made, we can compare where we're at today versus the last 20 years for people 15 years and older across Canada. Since 2008, wonder what happened there, our employment rate has essentially flattened, whereas the participation rate has been steadily declining. Some of that is likely due to our aging population, but keep 2008 in mind as we go along.
Foreshadowing.
Now, when you look at the unemployed, things get a little bit finicky. The unemployment rate, aka R4, is around 5.3%. And if you know anything about economics, that tells you we should be at full employment. But did you know there's almost as many categories of unemployment in Canada as there are movies in the Fast and Furious franchise? That's 10 Fast and Furious and 8 categories of unemployment? Yeah. The point being, R4 is often reported, but more so seemingly understood by the public as meaning to encapsulate all unemployed people, whereas R1, R2, and R8 together would be a much better representation of total unemployment. Now, I'm not going to cover every category, but R8 is one of the more comprehensive measures, as it includes discouraged job seekers, people waiting for recall from their current employer, people waiting for a reply from a prospective employer, people waiting for longer than 5 weeks to start a job they currently have, and people who are working but much less hours than they currently want to. That's where we come to the contentious part of the video. Temporary foreign workers and the International Mobility Program.
Shut it down, racist. Come out with your hands up, xenophobe.
Which is not to be confused with immigration as a general concept, which is mostly necessary to maintain some degree of population growth, as you can see in this chart. The problem is, I lied, this is the real chart. Now, that does seem a tad excessive when we're in the throes of a housing crisis and all of our hospitals seem to be held together with hope and pennies. But I'm a goose. What do I know? Now, back to the International Mobility Program. Government, at the behest of the private sector, always a good duo, has made it easier and easier for businesses to acquire temporary workers by allowing them to forego a labor market test. And on top of that, labor market tests suffer from the principal agent problem, which is way more complex than I'm about to make it seem, just like this whole video. Ooh, self-burn. But it's basically an asymmetric information problem between two entities with differing incentives. For example, governments want the economy to grow, but business wants more profit. Governments don't have all the information regarding the hiring process of every business, whereas businesses obviously have access to their own hiring information. So if a business claims they need temporary foreign workers due to a lack of domestic labor, which they do all the time, which again, growing population faster than G7, kind of weird, government can't really verify that, but they want economic growth, so they agree with business and bring in more temporary labor. This way, business is happy with very cheap labor, and government is happy as long as there's economic growth. Rinse and repeat. Again, it's more complicated, but that's kind of the gist of it. Here's a brief summary of the fundamental issue with just about any temporary foreign work program, and feel free to pause in this section as it gets a tad text-heavy, but links to these papers will be in the description. Temporary workers have lower reservation wages and are less likely to speak up regarding poor treatment because it's much harder for them to legally get another job. Employers, being the bastions of morality they often are, prefer someone in that position as they're just easier to exploit. And if you think that's a bit harsh, here's a few excerpts from the very succinctly titled Temporary Foreign Worker Program Report of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. And that shows a couple of the perspectives of the actual workers in these programs. Not the businesses, not the government agencies, the human beings. So just to name a few, we're talking limited social mobility, not a good start, verbal, physical, and sexual abuse, working for no wages, not getting vacation pay, forced to work more hours than they were contracted to, as well as fear of deportation due to illness, injury, or even pregnancy. Hey, Hitler, take it easy, bud. The atrocious treatment of humans aside, some of the macroeconomic effects of employers doing this are that it removes a lot of the pressure to raise the wage floor, which could benefit all workers, whether foreign or domestic. There can also be a crowding effect from having many more people competing for the same amount of jobs, which is analogous to how inflation can lower the purchasing power of any given dollar. To clarify that analogy a little bit, when new money is created to increase the economic output of goods and services over time, that generally speaking is good. When new money is created to fetch the same amount of goods and services, that lowers people's purchasing power. Just like how more labor, whether foreign or domestic, that produces and buys goods and services, especially big ones over time, like houses, property, cars, maybe they have kids, family, put the kids in school, there's taxes, everything else there, that generally speaking is good. But if that new labor isn't even allowed to stay in the country in most cases, that means they can't increase their economic output, which would improve both their quality of life along with our economy. And at this point, you might be wondering, well, what do you mean they're not allowed to stay in the country? Well, that's because a lot of the temporary workers are forced to leave the country after roughly 4 years and are banned from reapplying for another 4 years due to the cumulative duration rule. Many temporary workers are also ineligible for EI because of their temporary work permit, which, if you recall from earlier,
Hey, Hitler, take it easy, bud.
is why some of them fear deportation if they get injured. To sum it up, a lot of temporary workers are not allowed to be a full member of society, but employers extract the full value of their labor. So whether you care about economics and fiscal responsibility, or maybe you're more on the empathetic, care about the human being side, this one's tough to look at as anything other than a big old piece of shit. And before somebody tries to turn this into a partisan issue, here's the growth of temporary workers from 2000 to 2019, along with the corresponding changes in government. And a couple of key things to notice here are that the numbers for the TFWP specifically have mostly declined since 2008. Meanwhile, the International Mobility Program has accounted for 90% of the growth since 2000, and these permits are exempt from labor market tests, allow employment at any job anywhere in Canada, and have almost no administrative data nor oversight. Always good to have less data on large complex systems. So to wrap it all up, we've got a slightly aging but rapidly growing population, a poorly treated temporary workforce that's exploding, a declining rate of people participating in the labor force, a low unemployment rate if you pretend the people in R1, 2, and 8 just, don't exist, and there's currently no signs of this changing going forward. Canada, Canada. A couple of things you could do, though, is vote if you don't already. And I know our voting system sucks, but if more people voted, then maybe we could change and move on to bigger and better things. And if you do that, preferably do it for those who don't view working people as disposable pawns. That'd be nice. If they don't currently exist, raise hell with whichever political representatives you do have.
Maybe I'll burn it down.
And above all else,
Like and subscribe. Maybe share the video.
or don't. That's fine too. Whatever. Thanks for watching.